In this hand we min raise Queen 7 of spades from the button. Our opponent calls. Flop a flush and we get check raised to 200. I could flat here and trap, but in this kind of flop with 3 spades, I feel like this is more a raise for protection than a bluff, as there's going to be some turn cards our opponent won't want to see. Hands like aces with no spade. So I do decide to click this back. I still want our opponent to think that he does have some fold equity if he shoves over, which is why I don't do a 3-bet size that looks committing. But instead of jamming, he does just decide to call. Turn is a 5, and our opponent leads into us. Here I don't really see any punting flatting, as a spade could just end up killing my action. I expect this hand here to be aces up or ace 4 for a straight. So for that reason I just decide to shove all in now. My opponent does call, and he showed ace 4 for a straight. So in this hand we're against a 60 and 100s 4-man rig. He limps from the button and we make it 200. I think at this stack depth, 13 big blinds, if you make it any more than 200 you're going to get some folds. And he does decide to call. Flop is 3-7-7, and I do decide to c-bet small here. Reason being, I do want him to shove over hands like 3-5 and even some gut shot type hands like 4-5, 5-6. We also give him some room to float or even bluff. He does call, and the turn is a 5. I think check and turn here will make our hand look like 2 overs that's just missed this board. So I do expect him to shove over all his gut shot type hands that like made a pair on the turn, or some even worse hands too that just think our range looks weak after checking this turn. So he does shove and we call, and he did have 5-6. So in this hand we're pretty deep and 3-bet queen jack, but we do get called and we flop an open-ended straight draw. I c-bet here to 100 and get called. Turn is another 10. I do expect his 10x to mostly raise this flop, so another 10 coming makes it less likely for him to have a 10. I do expect this hand here to be mostly 9x, some overcards and some gut shots. So I do think continuing to barrel small versus that range is better than check calling maybe a larger bet and getting bluffed off our hand on the river when we miss. You will also find that he can't really raise that turn card and will more than likely fold his gut shots and overs on a paired board. If he does have 9x or weaker and continues, we still have good equity versus those hands, but he does decide to fold anyway. In this hand a passive opponent limps into us and we check back 10-7, and we flop 2 pair and check it to our opponent, who checks back, and the turn is a 3 and we bet 75 into 100. Our opponent just calls. The river is a 4 and we value bet 150, and our opponent over shoves. So to call this all in we have to be right an awful amount of times here, and there are some hands he can have here, the way he played his hand, that do have a speed. Hands like pocket 4s and also 8-9 he could have checked back on the flop as a trap. We only have 275 invested in this pot and pretty much have to call an all in here if we think we are right. Because this is rarely a bluff and I have to be right too much, I just decide to fold, and he does show 8-9 for a flop straight. In this hand our opponent min raises and we defend e7 off. We flop aces and check it to your opponent, who c-bets half pot. On this drive of flop, I think flatting is much better than raising. We have a weak kicker and I doubt our opponent is going to re-raise us and get it in with horse value. But the most important thing is raising will fold out our opponent's bluffs that may barrel off versus us if we just check call. He probably thinks we aren't flatting aces, so our range might look like 9x or 6x, which he thinks he can barrel us off by the turn of river. So we do just check call. We check call on the turn as well. And the river we also just check call. And our opponent shows queen 5 off for a total bluff. I think it's really important here to keep your opponent's bluffs in. It can even be the difference between winning and losing a game. And we will also lose them in the times that we just check call and he does have a spade. In this hand we min raise aces from the button and our opponent 3-bets. I think in this situation here, after villain 3-bets this shallow, I think most people just 4-bet jam here because they think they're getting called. Against good thinking players, I do see this play a lot where they will 3-bet shallow for fold equity. And it's a good play because if you think about it from our position, we're just going to fold all our trashy junk hands and we're only going to really be able to 4-bet jam over with their good value hands. So even for us, a hand like ace 5 has a hard time jamming over his 3-bet here, and we'll probably just end up folding and waiting for a better spot. So if our opponent is 3-betting here the shallow for fold equity, I want to be able to use that against them, so that is the reason I do decide just to flat here. We'll also get his c-bet and we can also get him to stack off if he catches any piece of the board. So pot is 600 and he c-bets 240. With the flop being 3 diamonds and us having pocket aces with the ace of diamonds, I think we can just call here. I don't want to raise here if there's a possibility he will fold some hands that may shove on the turn. So with the pot so bloated, I do expect him to shove a lot of turns with some of his range here. So I do just call and the turn is a 2. So on the turn he checks. And I go ahead and bet 360, around 1/3 of the pot. Versus that sizing, I do expect him to call with most of his pairs and some medium-sized diamonds. So he does call, and the river's the 10 of diamonds. And he leads into us. So here's just an obvious jam. He's going to call for those odds. And he shows a flop king with the 5 of diamonds. So you can see by just flatting aces to a 3-bet this shallow, you can make more chips this way versus their trash hands that are just going to fold versus your 4-bet jam.